A single drop of blood on an old book can tell more truth than a room full of witnesses. And on this cold morning in Elderwood Bay, that one drop was enough to turn a quiet bookstore into the center of a chilling mystery. The sun had barely risen over the small Canadian town of Elderwood Bay when the street lamps began to flicker off. Fog rested against the buildings like a blanket, softening the edges of the quiet shops that lined the narrow road. At the end of the street stood Page Turner Books, an old wooden bookstore that had been part of the town for more than 100 years. Its faded sign creaked whenever the wind brushed past it, and most mornings only a few early readers wandered in. But today would be different today. The silence inside the shop was hiding something heavy. At exactly 7:05 a.m. The bookstore's librarian, Marlene Pierce, arrived with her usual cup of coffee warming her hands. She pushed the door open with the same calm routine she had followed for years. But the moment she took her first step inside, her breath caught in her throat. The store felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt forced, like someone had pressed pause on a scene that should have been full of life. As she moved deeper into the aisles, something on the counter pulled her attention. It was a book, an old leather-bound novel lying open, as if someone had been reading it before leaving in a hurry. But what stopped her was not the book itself. It was the dark red stain splashed across its pages. At first, she thought it might be ink. But ink does not drip. Ink does not smear. And ink does not leave a metallic smell in the air. Her hands shook as she whispered to herself, "This isn't right." She set her coffee down, her heartbeat rising in her ears. She forced herself to step closer, staring at the stain. It was fresh. Too fresh. Then she saw something else on the floor, a faint trail of droplets leading between the shelves. Slowly, she followed them, each step heavier than the last. The path curved behind the history section, disappeared behind a book cart, and finally stopped near the rare books alcove. That's where she saw him. Harold Dunston, the owner of Page Turner Books, lay on his side, his glasses hanging off one ear, his hand curled tightly around a torn page from a book. His shirt was soaked, his face was pale, and there was no doubt at all that Harold was gone. Marlene stumbled backward, almost slipping, her hand flying to her mouth to stop a scream from escaping. Her coffee cup rolled across the wooden floor, spilling a trail of brown liquid that mixed with the red near Harold's arm. She reached for her phone, her fingers barely working as she dialed the police. Within minutes, the quiet morning street exploded with flashing red and blue lights. Officers surrounded the building, blocking off the entrance with yellow tape. Curious neighbors stepped out of their homes, gathering near the sidewalks, whispering questions nobody had answers to inside. Detectives began their first sweep of the scene, trying to make sense of what had happened. They noticed the open book. They noticed the blood. And most importantly, they noticed the torn page clutched tightly in Harold's hand, almost as if he knew he wouldn't get another chance to reveal what it meant. Outside, a cold wind swept across Elderwood Bay, carrying with it the early signs of a mystery that would unravel secrets far older than the bookstore itself. Something in that shop was worth killing for. And as the officers closed the door behind them, the town had only one question: who murdered Harold Dunston? And what terrible truth was hidden inside the blood-stained book? Detective Aaron Hale stepped into Page Turner Books with steady footsteps, but even he felt the weight in the air. The smell of old paper mixed with the sharp scent of dried blood created a strange, heavy atmosphere. Harold's body had already been taken away, yet the room still felt like it held his final breath. Aaron's partner, Detective Lila Hart, scanned the bookshelves as if the truth might be hiding between the pages. The first thing that caught their attention was the rare book lying open on the counter. It was a first edition, bound in cracked brown leather, the kind of treasure collectors fought over. But today it was more than a collector's dream. It was evidence. The blood had dried in dark lines across its pages, but one small detail stood out. A fingerprint, clear, sharp, left on the glass frame that had once protected the book. Lila bent closer, careful not to touch anything, and murmured, "Whoever handled this wasn't careful." Aaron nodded, but his attention drifted to the torn page found in Harold's hand. It was now placed inside a sealed evidence bag, the ink slightly faded but the message still visible. A strange symbol sat near the bottom of the page, something that looked like a coded signature. It wasn't something a regular reader would recognize. This wasn't random. This was planned. They began questioning the locals, and it didn't take long before names and whispers formed a list of possible suspects. Elderwood Bay was a small town, and secrets never stayed buried for long. The first name was Charlotte Mears, owner of North Star Reads, a competing bookstore just 3 blocks away. Her shop had been struggling for years. Harold, on the other hand, had just been preparing for a big announcement about a lost manuscript. News that would have brought waves of customers to page-turner books. Charlotte had a reason to be jealous, and jealousy had a way of growing into something dark. Next came Owen Clark, a historian known for spending long, quiet hours in the town archives. He wasn't the type who appeared on police lists, but earlier that week he had confronted Harold in public, accusing him of stealing a manuscript that belonged to Owen's grandfather. Witnesses said the argument had gotten heated enough that Harold's assistant had to step between them. And now that Harold was dead, Owen's anger didn't look so harmless anymore. Then there was Myra Dunston, Harold's niece. She had returned to town only a month ago after years of silence. Some neighbors believe she came back because she missed her uncle. Others believe she came back because she needed money and Harold's collection of rare books was worth a fortune. Myra had no alibi for the night before, and when detectives visited her apartment, her hands trembled a little too much for comfort. Back inside the bookstore, something else caught Aaron's eye. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No damaged locks. Whoever killed Harold either had a key or Harold had willingly let them in. The thought made the room feel even colder. Lila found a faint smear of ink on the floor near the back office door. She crouched down, studying it closely. "This matches the ink on the torn page," she said softly. Whatever Harold ripped out, he must have done it during the struggle. Aaron followed her line of sight to the narrow aisle leading to the rare book section. Dust had been disturbed, leaving a faint trail of footprints. The prints were inconsistent, as though the person had been moving quickly, maybe even running. One shelf had been slightly knocked out of place, as if someone brushed against it or shoved past it in a hurry. As the morning passed, the bookstore filled with quiet voices, flashing cameras, and small clues that only raised more questions. Each suspect had a motive. Each had a reason to want Harold out of the way. But the detectives could feel it. There was something else. Something deeper. Something hidden in ink and paper, waiting to be uncovered. And as they left the store to confirm the fingerprint found on the book, one thought kept echoing in Aaron's mind. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message. By late afternoon, the fog over Elderwood Bay had lifted, but the mystery around Harold Dunston's death only grew thicker. Detective Lila Hart sat in the quiet corner of the police station, staring at the torn page from Harold's hand. The strange symbol at the bottom wasn't random. It looked like a small circle crossed by 2 thin lines, simple yet purposeful. When she compared it to the markings inside the rare book, she noticed something unsettling. The same symbol appeared faintly on several pages, hidden near the margins, almost as if someone had tried to erase it long ago while she studied the page. Detective Hale returned from the town archive with a box full of old documents. "You won't believe this," he said, placing the box on the desk. Harold didn't just find a rare manuscript. He found a missing chapter from a Canadian writer who died nearly 50 years ago, and it wasn't supposed to exist. Lila raised an eyebrow. "Missing as in never published?" Aaron nodded. "Missing as in someone made sure it disappeared." Inside the box were letters written by the long-dead author, Jonathan Elridge, a name every Canadian literature student knew. His sudden death had always seemed suspicious, but no one had ever found proof of foul play. Now it seemed Harold had stumbled onto something Jonathan never got to reveal. The more Aaron read, the clearer the truth became. Jonathan had accused a rival writer of stealing parts of his work. He planned to expose the plagiarism at a literary conference, but he never made it there. His death had been ruled an accident, and the missing chapter his proof was never found. Until now, Lila leaned back in her chair, trying to process the revelation. So Harold planned to reveal Jonathan's truth at the upcoming Elderwood Literary Gala. The timing matched perfectly. Harold had been excited for weeks, telling friends he had something that would change Canadian literature forever. But he refused to share details. Now detectives understood why. What Harold found was dangerous not because of the book itself, but because of the legacy it threatened. But there was something else hidden in the notes. Something that made both detectives pause. Several pages showed signs of forgery. Ink that didn't match the original manuscript. Edges that looked newer. Someone had tried to replace entire paragraphs with false text likely to hide the truth. About the plagiarism, the mystery deepened. Who had the skill to forge old manuscripts? Who knew the history of Jonathan Elridge well enough to alter it? And who stood to lose everything if the truth came out? Charlotte Mears came to mind first. Her family had owned a small restoration business decades ago, one involved in repairing old books sometimes too perfectly. Some townspeople whispered that her father had forged manuscripts for collectors in the past. Could Charlotte have inherited more than just his shop? Then there was Owen Clark, whose grandfather had once been accused of stealing ideas from Jonathan Elridge. If the manuscript exposed the truth, Owen's family name would be dragged through the mud. And judging by his desperate behavior in recent weeks, Owen was running out of patience and time. Finally, Myra Dunston, Harold's niece. Her sudden return still felt too convenient. While she claimed she had no interest in rare books, detectives found old photos of her helping Harold catalog his collection years ago. She understood the value of each item more than she admitted. As night approached, Aaron and Lila drove back to the bookstore to search for more clues. The shop felt even colder this time, as if the walls were guarding stories they didn't want to release. In the corner, near the storage room, Lila noticed something new, a thin stack of papers shoved behind a row of old travel guides. She pulled them out carefully. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. These weren't just notes. They were drafts of the missing chapter, written in two different handwriting styles. One belonged to Jonathan Elridge. The other belonged to someone still alive. This changes everything, Lila whispered. The realization hit them both instantly. Harold's killer wasn't just protecting a manuscript. They were protecting themselves, and somewhere in Elderwood Bay, that person was watching, waiting, hoping their secret stayed buried in ink and lies. The night settled over Elderwood Bay like a velvet curtain, covering the quiet town in deep shadows. Inside the police station, detectives Aaron Hale and Lila Hart sat across from each other. The newly discovered papers spread across the table. Two handwriting styles, two authors, and a truth that had been buried for half a century. Lila tapped her finger on the second handwriting sample. This style. Look at the slant, the pressure on the letters. It's recent. She lifted a sheet closer to the lamp. Someone tried to rewrite Jonathan Elridge's missing chapter. Not 50 years ago, more like within the last month. Aaron grabbed the sample and compared it to the handwriting from Owen Clark's recent complaint forms. The shape of the letters, the looping style, it was almost identical. A cold realization crept into the room. It's him, Aaron murmured. Owen didn't just want the manuscript back. He was trying to rewrite history literally. Within minutes, they had a warrant. The drive through Elderwood Bay was silent except for the hum of the engine. And when they reached Owen's small house near the edge of town, the porch was dark. Only a single lamp glowed inside, flickering through the curtains like a nervous heartbeat. Owen opened the door before they even knocked, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. "I figured you'd come," he said, stepping back with a hollow voice inside. The living room was cluttered with old books, ink bottles, and half-finished notes scattered across the table. But the object that caught Lila's eye was the glass case on the shelf, the exact model Harold used to protect the rare book. The same model found in the bookstore that morning. A small crack on the corner matched perfectly. Owen noticed where she was looking. He slowly lowered himself onto a chair. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he whispered. I couldn't let it destroy my family's name." Aaron's voice remained steady. "Tell us what happened." Owen closed his eyes, the truth finally spilling out. He explained how he discovered Harold had the missing chapter. He knew the manuscript would expose his grandfather as a fraud, a man who had built his entire career on stolen ideas. Owen had tried to bargain with Harold, begged him to keep the truth hidden. But Harold refused. The night before Harold's death, Owen returned to the shop after hours. Harold was inside, examining the manuscript under a bright reading lamp. They argued again. Harold pulled out the torn page and told Owen he planned to reveal everything at the literary gala. Panicked, Owen grabbed the manuscript, trying to take it. A struggle broke out, books crashing to the floor. Harold lost his balance, hitting his head on the corner of a shelf. The impact was sharp, fatal. Owen froze, unable to believe what he'd done. He wiped his prints from some surfaces, but in his shock, he left one clear fingerprint on the book's glass frame. He tried to take the manuscript home to destroy the truth, but fear overwhelmed him. He returned it to the shop, hoping it would all be blamed on a robbery gone wrong. When he finished speaking, the room fell silent. There was no anger in his voice, only deep regret. But regret could not change the truth. Lila gently collected the forged pages as evidence. "You didn't just try to protect your grandfather," she said softly. "You tried to rewrite a history that wasn't yours to change." Owen stood up slowly, his eyes empty. "I know." Minutes later, he was led outside in handcuffs. The cold air carried the quiet sound of branches swaying, as if the town itself exhaled after holding its breath all day. Back at the bookstore, the rare manuscript was taken into protective custody. Experts would confirm its authenticity. Jonathan Elridge's final word silence for decades would finally be heard, but just as Aaron and Lila prepared to close the case file, a uniformed officer rushed toward them with a small envelope. It had no return address, no stamp. Only 5 words written on the front, "For the detectives of Elderwood Bay." Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typewritten message. Harold's death was only the beginning. Beneath it, the same strange circle and line symbol from the torn page. Aaron and Lila exchanged a glance, one filled with caution, curiosity, and the undeniable sense that this mystery was far from over. A new storm was forming in Elderwood Bay, and someone out there was ready to turn the next page.